24 hours. You can see, once again, the amount of damage is much, much larger. There is rubble strewn all through the car park. Firefighters have just been inside. They've managed to extinguish the blaze. Now, yesterday, the first missile came in and it hit the apartment on the top right, punched a hole through that one with the round edge on the side. Neighbours and first responders who were on the scene told us yesterday that it was empty. There was nobody there. And so the attempted Israeli assassination strike, which appears to be what this was not successful. But 24 hours later, another missile came rocketing in to the same building. And you can see on the bottom left here, it's a much larger hole, a great deal more damage. Now, we spoke to the Mukhtar here yesterday because this Burj Hammoud is a majority Armenian Christian neighborhood. But there is and has for a long time been a Shia community here as well. And we spoke to the community leader yesterday. He told us that this place has nothing to do with Hezbollah. He doesn't know why the Israelis would have targeted this building. But clearly, they thought that there was somebody in here that they were attempting to kill. And speaking to first responders on the scene today, they tell us that this time the apartment was not empty. This is one of a series of Israeli assassination strikes on the capital in the last week, targeting areas outside Dahia, outside traditional areas where Hezbollah supporters live. In fact, they've targeted hotels in downtown and in Christian neighborhoods, and a devastating strike on people sleeping displaced on the beachfront. Heidi Pett, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Well, despite the daily Israeli airstrikes on southern Beirut around the airport, Lebanon's national airline is still flying. All others have cancelled flights. Middle East Airlines says it follows strict safety protocols, holding hours-long daily meetings to assess the risks of keeping Lebanon connected with the world during the fighting. Bernard Smith reports from Beirut.
All this area that is normally bombarded, we're not using this part of the runway. We are not parking any aircraft on this side.
As Israel pummels Hezbollah's stronghold in southern Lebanon all around the airport, the national airline has kept on flying, partly because of a tacit understanding with the Israelis.
And rest assured, if we are flying, if we are letting MEA fly, it means we are sure everything is under control. Just to give you an example, 3-4 days ago, we had a flight. They had a flight coming from Paris, and there were a lot of activities in the area. So they kept on holding, and in the end, they were about to divert to Larnaca. So they talked to the controller. The controller made a broadcast that we have a civilian aircraft coming to land on 6, please clear the approach pass. And they cleared the approach pass. The aircraft landed, and then they continued bombing.
Welcome to Beirut.
No other airlines are willing to take such risks, as an almost deserted airport demonstrates. Lebanese people see it as a point of pride that Middle East Airlines keeps flying.
We are loyal customers, always with Middle Eastern Airlines.
And you, sir, are you proud of Middle East Airlines?
I'm very proud. It's our airline. Everyone in the country is proud of their airline.
I'm sure they arrange something between them. No bomb will be, no problem with the Middle East. No security problem with the Middle East.
It's also prohibitively expensive for foreign airlines to get the insurance needed to fly here in times of conflict. But for Middle East Airlines, the state is essentially the insurer of last resort, providing financial guarantees that private companies won't. Israel hasn't always spared MEA. In 1968, Israeli forces blew up aircraft in their conflict with Palestinian fighters. It happened again in 1982. In this latest conflict, the airport has never closed. Everyone who wants to come home to Beirut has been able to. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Well, the backlog of travellers who are struggling to transit through the Middle East is growing. In Thailand, one of the world's most popular tourist destinations, more than 400 flights have been affected. And that's disrupting the holiday plans of tens of thousands of people. From Bangkok, Tony Cheng has this report.
It was supposed to be a couple of months' escape from the bleak British winter for Sam and Mark. Instead, they're now worrying about how to get home. Their original flight through Doha has been cancelled, and they've no idea when a new seat will be available.
The frustration mainly is through the communication, and I would have thought since COVID they might have had a better contingency plan in place.
The beaches of Southeast Asia are a popular choice for tourists seeking to escape the cold weather. Few would have imagined that the war in Iran would impact their plans. But 20,000 flights have been cancelled globally in recent weeks, leaving more than 400,000 people stranded.
Hi everyone, update on Brits stuck in Thailand.
Many passengers, frustrated by the lack of information from airlines and governments, have turned to social media.
Right now there's a lot of misinformation circulating. The media are saying a small number of flights are leaving Doha and Abu Dhabi, but if you actually check the departure boards in the airport, transit flights remain cancelled.
The Thai government's offered financial assistance to some passengers, but stiff requirements mean few will qualify. Visas will be extended, they say, but information is scarce. It's estimated that clearing the backlog of passengers who are currently stuck here could take as long as a month. But the bigger problem for Thailand is that as people start to make bookings for a perfect summer holiday on a paradise beach in Southeast Asia, they're not going to want to travel through the Middle East. Tony Cheng, Al Jazeera, Suvarnabhumi Airport, Bangkok.
Going to take a look at some other global stories now. A harsh sandstorm is sweeping across the Gaza Strip, where Palestinians are living in tents and temporary shelters. Sand is seeping into the fragile shelters, worsening living conditions. Health warnings have been issued as many families don't have basic protection from the storm. And staying with Gaza, thousands of wounded Palestinians are struggling to get access to the specialized treatment they need after months of war. Hospitals there can only provide limited rehabilitation, and many patients require treatment abroad. But with crossings largely closed, their chances of recovery are slipping away. Al Jazeera's Khalid Mahmoud reports from Gaza City in the north.
At the age of 12, Hamdi is learning how to walk again. He was severely injured during Israel's war. Now, much of his day is spent in physical therapy sessions.
Every day, he watches kids playing football and starts crying. He asks me, why am I not like them? Why can't I walk?
Doctors say early and intensive treatment is critical for patients with severe spinal and nerve injuries. But more than 2 years of Israeli bombardment have decimated Gaza health system.
We bring him here for physiotherapy while we wait for approval to travel abroad to remove the shrapnel from his body. Doctors say that if he can have the surgery, there is still a chance he could walk again.
Even though Hamdi has permission to leave, he is trapped in Gaza because the Israeli military has shut down the Rafah crossing.
After a long wait, we finally managed to get him a referral for treatment abroad, but then the crossing closed.
Even with a specialized treatment, recovery can take months, sometimes years. 6 months into the ceasefire, thousands of wounded Palestinians, many of them as children, are still waiting for medical evacuation. Inside this hospital, hundreds of patients are waiting desperately for medical evacuation. Doctors are saying advanced rehabilitation is crucial for patients recovering from spinal injuries. But as long as Gaza remains closed, Hamdi and his family are left waiting, and his chances of walking again fade away. Hani Mahmoud, Al Jazeera, from Gaza City, Palestine.
North Korea has fired nearly 10 ballistic missiles off its eastern coast, according to South Korea. The Japanese Coast Guard says the projectiles landed in the sea after they traveled around 340 kilometers. The launch comes days after the US and South Korea held joint military drills. Cuba's President Miguel Díaz-Canel says his government has held talks with the US to discuss Washington's blockade on his country. The United States has cut off oil supplies from Venezuela and Mexico, decimating the Cuban economy and triggering a humanitarian crisis. No fuel has entered the island in 3 months. The president says declining fuel reserves have made Cuba's electrical grid increasingly unstable. A U.S. judge has blocked subpoenas by the Justice Department as part of the criminal investigation of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. The inquiry is being led by a Trump-appointed prosecutor. She accuses Powell of making false statements in his testimony before Congress. He's being questioned about a $2.5 billion renovation of the Fed's historic headquarters in Washington, D.C. But Friday's judgment ruled there was no evidence of any crime other than, quote, displeasing the president. It called the investigation a pretext aimed at pressuring Powell into cutting interest rates. Up next, Inside Story is going to examine what Israel's endgame in Iran could be. I'm Rob Matheson. Stay with us on Al Jazeera.
The latest news as it breaks.
Hearing call to prayers and sharing a meal. These traditions connect them to their faith, to each other, even at the most difficult circumstances.
With detailed coverage.
As the Gaza willpower team trains, every step becomes a proof that while war can break bodies, can't break the human urge to live.
From the heart of the story.
A radio signal in Gaza carries unusual weight. It not only delivers information, but provides a sense of connection.
We saw this exact same pattern happen in Gaza, the same lazy, flattened reporting that we saw in Gaza when it comes to the war on Iran.
The Listening Post decodes the media on Al Jazeera.
My strong appeal to both parties to both parties, to Hezbollah and to Israel, is for a ceasefire to stop the war and pave the way to find a solution that would allow Lebanon to become a country independent, with sovereignty and territorial integrity respected.
As the conflict escalates and the UN mission appears to have failed, for communities caught up in the violence, peace remains elusive. Vincent Monaghan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Before we speak to our panel, joining us from Naqoura in the south of Lebanon is Candice Ardiel, the spokesperson for UNIFIL, the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, the UN peacekeepers who are there on the ground. Candice, let me ask you about the current situation. First, how would you describe the military situation where you are?
Thanks, James. The situation here in South Lebanon at the moment, as you can understand, is extremely tense. It's extremely volatile. Since the 2nd of March, when Hezbollah claimed responsibility for an attack on Israel, we've seen daily missile, rocket, and drone attacks coming from Lebanese territory. And of course, we've seen daily responses in terms of airstrikes, artillery, and other attacks coming from Israel to Lebanese territory. Obviously, this puts us as peacekeepers in a very challenging position. We've seen the displacement of Lebanese authorities tell us up to 500,000 people from UNIFIL's area of operations, some within the area, some going northward. So we've seen a great deal of displacement, destruction, and violence here in South Lebanon. Peacekeepers are here on the ground, continuing to do the work that we can at the moment, but obviously this is very challenged.
So tell me more about the humanitarian fallout. Clearly, Israel has been demanding that people leave. We're seeing scores of people leaving, many thousands of people leaving, but I guess there are some staying behind as well. What are the conditions?
Within our area of operations, we're seeing a great deal of back and forth exchanges of fire across the blue line on a daily basis. As I mentioned, there are airstrikes, artillery, rockets coming from Lebanese territory, missiles. So there's a great deal of destruction. Many people have left, and peacekeepers have actually helped facilitate the safe movement of about 100 civilians who requested our help to leave to move to safer areas. Many people have left on their own, but there are still people who stay, and they're living in very difficult conditions. But these are their homes. People, you can understand, they don't want to leave. But the situation is extremely volatile. It's extremely dangerous. And the violence is continuing. And as peacekeepers, we're here trying to do what we can, but in this situation, it becomes very difficult.
Of course, as you say, you are a peacekeeping force. I don't know the current numbers because I'd struggle to get them on your website, but somewhere around 10,000 troops, maybe a little less than that you currently have in the country. What are they actually doing? Are they keeping the peace? Because UNIFIL's been there for 47 years, and your big bosses, the UN Security Council, they've already said they're planning to disband your force.
In fact, we now have about 7,500 peacekeepers due to recent reductions in our force because of the liquidity crisis that the entire UN is facing. And this is separate indeed from the withdrawal that UNIFIL has been asked to do when our mandate comes to an end at the end of this year. The Security Council has said that our mission will end December 31st, 2026, and peacekeepers will begin to leave throughout 2027. Now, this is obviously a very challenging situation now because we have fewer peacekeepers to be able to do the work that we did. We've had to adjust the way that we operate, but nonetheless, we continue to do that work, and we'll continue to do that throughout 2026.
You say you continue to do the work. Right now, though, with missiles flying, with some Israeli troops on the ground in southern Lebanon, are your troops actually doing anything, or are they just hunkering down in their bases?
Well, definitely the work has changed. We've had to adapt what we do. Previously, we could be out patrolling throughout the area of operations and doing things like that. But now peacekeepers are, for the most part, confined to bases. There are still some movements for essential logistical resupplies of fuel, food, and water. But for the most part, peacekeepers are in their bases. We have about 50 bases throughout South Lebanon, many of them, more than half of them, along the line. So this does give us some visibility into what's happening on the ground. But of course, it's not the same as it was before. And nonetheless, peacekeepers remain in position to continue to monitor and report to provide at least some information to the Security Council about what's happening on the ground.
Candice Ardiel, the spokesperson for UNIFIL, the UN force in southern Lebanon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, let's discuss all of the issues that have been raised with our panel of guests who are joining us on Inside Story today. From Paris, Nadim Houri, Executive Director of the Arab Reform Initiative. Maureen Philippon is in Beirut. She's the Norwegian Refugee Council's Country Director for Lebanon. And in Athens, Nicholas No, Editor-in-Chief of the Beirut-based news service MideastWire.com. Thank you very much for joining us. Maureen, let me start with you. We're just hearing from UNIFIL in the south. They say on this day where the UN Secretary General is visiting Beirut that their peacekeepers are trying to help people. But let's get the picture across the country and where you are in Beirut, where many people have fled to. How bad is it?
It's fairly bad. I mean, across the country, certainly the south is, and with Beirut suburbs, is the most affected by the bombardment. But the displacement, the scale and the speed of the displacement has affected the entire country. The anxiety, the stress, the people, fleeing with nothing, sometime in the middle of the night. It's really something quite dramatic to see. They are, many of them have found a shelter in schools that are really not proper for settling in with your family. They are turning classroom into bedrooms, sharing the classroom with 3-4 families that they don't know from before. So the situation is fairly rough.
Nicholas, these people are fleeing from bombardment by Israel, but also, and we've seen this before in Gaza, they're fleeing because of the threat of bombardment. The Israeli military issuing orders of forced expulsion to people, terrifying people, saying you've just got to leave now.
I mean, not only terrifying immediately, but it looks like in the last few hours, and we've seen some reporting that the Israeli military is now going after civilian infrastructure directly as a matter of principled policy. This is going to have an even worse effect on an already very dire situation, and attacks, some of which are clearly illegal under international law inside Lebanon. Let's leave aside the rest of the region for a moment. So it looks as if the impact on civilians is going to dramatically worsen in the coming hours and days, especially if Israel ramps up what appears to be the beginning of concerted attacks on civilian infrastructure. And I'd say a second thing, which is even worse, is that the policy by the Israelis, it seems, has been to try to exacerbate underlying sectarian religious divisions, geographic divisions as well, by trying to funnel people of certain communities through certain areas, by targeted bombings, which can enhance some of the underlying sectarian or religious differences that have long existed in Lebanon. That awful strategy appears to be one that the Israelis are intent on also driving forward in an attempt possibly to try to have Lebanese turn on one another and thus embroil Hezbollah in a fight in its own depth, a fight against other Lebanese citizens. And if that goes forward, remember, this is a country that was in civil war for over 15 years and has been living with that legacy for quite some time. This is something that could be absolutely disastrous for the humanitarian situation and for the hope to keep Lebanon together as a relatively stable, unified state.
Nadim, I mean, Israel says it responded because Hezbollah fired missiles because of what's going on in Iran, but there's growing evidence, is there not, that Israel has been planning this?
Sure. Look, I mean, this is, I would say, probably, just a continuation of what we've seen since 2024, right? There were about 10,000 violations by Israel of the ceasefire that was signed between Lebanon and Israel in September 2024. And this latest round is perhaps just a continuation of that. But we're also seeing Israel expanding, as Nick was describing, its targeting strategy compared to the last war in 2024. Basically using orders to displace large parts of the population, not even certain areas, to expanding what it considers, how it's using its targeting, including now targeting certain civilian infrastructure. It's clear that all the messaging from Israel is that they see this as their moment to end, in a way, to in their perspective, to defeat Hezbollah once and for all. The problem is, from recent history, not just in Lebanon, but across sort of armed insurgencies, we know you cannot end armed insurgencies purely by military power or airstrikes. So the only path forward is actually the path that was the Lebanese state and government were implementing, which is a gradual disarmament of Hezbollah and a rebuilding of Lebanese state institutions. But unfortunately, Israel and the US are not providing the space and the time for this to take place. And I fear that we're really entering into this sort of war that there can be no winner, only loss and destruction in Lebanon.
Maureen, I mean, I'm going to bring up the example of Gaza again, because it seems to me civilians in Lebanon have no idea right now where is safe. And that means for civilians, nowhere is safe.
That's very true. It takes different shapes. When you are living in an area that just received an evacuation order, you don't know if and when Israel is going to strike. And so if you're just panicking and you want to leave that area, we've seen recently buildings that were warned before being targeted, and so the area around 300 to 500 meters having to be evacuated. That included the schools that host currently IDPs and also a kindergarten. And so everybody moved. And then for a few hours, they were just waiting and moved in a rush, like moved in panic. And then for hours, they've been waiting for actually the bomb to fail and then going back there. We have, even yesterday night, the strikes in Beirut, I had colleagues who actually did the same. Like they got the warning, they just fled for their homes. They didn't know whether there would be the strike, when would be the strike, what do they take with them, what do they have the time to prepare and take with them. So this is really creating a lot of fear and anxiety among the Lebanese population. Another example, we got our office in Tyre damaged by a strike nearby. So even though you're not a target and you think you're safe, but then the power of the strike, the blast of the strike, can also create significant damage. We are seeing significant level of destructions across Lebanon, and therefore people are making impossible choices. Either they flee somewhere where they hope for safety in living conditions that will be harsh, people sleeping in their cars, some people sleeping out on the corniche in Beirut, or in schools where the conditions are, just better because you have a roof, and the luckiest one can go to relatives or friends in safe area, or they decide to stay put and live through this moment of super strong fear and anxiety of maybe they're going to get bombed. There's still many people could not make the move and look for safety because of a variety of personal circumstances. Like, if you take care of your old parents, for instance, it's super difficult to move somewhere else. So there is a lot of over-layering conditions that make actually searching for safety very difficult. Having said that, even if Israel issues notice for evacuation, civilians remain civilians wherever they are and at all times. So even if people don't move from the evacuation order under evacuation notice, they do remain civilians and they do remain protected by international humanitarian law.
Nicholas, as ever, in their public pronouncements, Israel try to make this sound simple. The Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, saying he's told the Lebanese president that if it doesn't prevent Hezbollah threatening the north and firing at Israel, we'll take the territory and do it ourselves. There's an impossible dilemma for the Lebanese government now, isn't there?
The Lebanese government has long been in an impossible dilemma. We now know from clear public statements from American officials, as well as Israeli officials, that for, let's say, 21 years after the Cedar Revolution, 2005, when Syrian troops were kicked out of the country, in part because of a large part of the Lebanese population rising up and demanding they exit following the assassination of a former prime minister. Unfortunately, since that time, the United States and Israel have refused to build the Lebanese army up to be a credible national defense force. Because, as Tom Barak, the U.S. envoy, said recently, that would mean being able to defend against Israel, and that is not going to happen. So you have an army that has been kept intentionally weak by the Israelis and the Americans, that they now want to do a job which they themselves have not been able to do until now. And let's remember as well that if the Israeli defense minister and other officials are saying the threat from Hezbollah is so awful and imminent and ongoing, then why haven't they launched this famed ground invasion yet? And I think part of the reason for that is that the Israeli ground forces are not ready and are not well equipped for yet another ground invasion and occupation of Lebanon, certainly not a large one.
Let me bring in Nadim on that particular aspect, because the threat is we will take the territory and do it ourselves. Perhaps you can add a little bit of a historical context here, because Israel invaded Lebanon in 1978, 1982, 2006, and 2024. It also occupied southern Lebanon for 18 years. Do you think they are seriously considering doing this again when it was such a failure every time they've tried this before?
Look, what I fear today is that they will create a new buffer zone in Lebanon. It will be a form of occupation similar to what we've seen in Gaza, but unlike what we saw in Israeli occupation up until 2000 in Lebanon, they will rely on new technology to have a light footprint on the ground, reducing the effectiveness of any resistance effort to push them out. And we're seeing it already, right? The entire front row of Lebanese villages have been entirely demolished, with a few exceptions. There are drones that are constantly monitoring what's happening. Farmers are forbidden from tending to the land. So in a way, it's a de facto occupation, even if they're not maintaining troops on the ground in a continuous manner. That is today, for me, the biggest threat to Lebanon, is the form of renewed occupation by Israel of a buffer zone, which could be, 6 kilometers in, 10 kilometers in. I don't know what they're thinking. And at that point, the impossible choices that will be offered to Lebanon would be sign a humiliating submission deal to Israel, or continue living what we've been living since 2024, a sort of occupation by space. I mean, the way Israel has been able to infiltrate, I just came back from Lebanon. People's phone rings and they get these recorded messages, move here, leave here, phone calls, a drone is over your head. It's really a new form of occupation. And Lebanon is very lonely today because the main theater of war is in the Gulf. So diplomatic energy support is all focused on what is happening in the Gulf, the impact on oil, the impact on world markets. Perhaps the only country that still has some diplomatic space for Lebanon is France, but we've seen that France has been unable to compel Israel to do anything, and France is even finding it hard to get the US to come up with a concrete way forward, because the US seems to be, so far, to be giving Israel a full green light to do whatever it wants to do.
Maureen, if I could bring you in again. So for much of the world, this is a sideshow. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but given everything you've heard, I assume as a humanitarian agency like yourself, you have to prepare for what might happen. Do you fear things are going to get worse?
I hope not, and I hope some form of going back to diplomacy will prevail and form of reason from all parties to the conflict. But indeed, we are preparing for worse. We are preparing for, infrastructure like access being more difficult, if bridges start being bombed and things like that. So we are really preparing to assist people wherever they have to stay, and in more and more challenging conditions and economic conditions, because then, it's not only the war, it's then what are the impact of the war on the economic of a country and on the daily life of the country.
Nicholas, I mean, clearly the conflict in Lebanon broke out because of what happened in Iran, or at least the timing, the spark was that. But are these actually the same war, or is the war in Lebanon a different war? And if Trump was to say, and the Iranians even say, the war ends with regard to the attack on Iran, do you fear that Israel might continue this conflict?
I think these two battlefields are deeply connected. And I think that it will be difficult to imagine that any one of the many actors involved will be able to disconnect different parts. I don't think at this point, given the existential nature of the open war, which Hezbollah and its main state ally, Iran, are engaged in, I don't see a kind of decoupling between the two, precisely for the reason that you raised, which is that kind of decoupling Lebanon from the Iran conflict at this point or in the coming period would expose Hezbollah to the full powers of Israel, which would help allow them to wreak greater destruction on the country, to do this kind of creeping technological occupation, which Nadim explained, which is new.
Marines from Japan to the region. They'll take about 2 weeks to get to the area, and these would be used for security in terms of potentially boarding a ship or also protecting and escorting. But beyond that, the Donald Trump's administration has essentially been threatening Iran, saying, look, we've already kind of given you our warning shot, and if this continues, we will target your oil infrastructure, something that hasn't occurred with the strikes that were on and targeting Kark Island. So what we know for now is the U.S. president says that he could reconsider his decision and go full throttle if necessarily. And finally, we should point out that when it comes to the flow of oil and commercial goods through the Strait of Hormuz, that the White House is really pressuring other nations to keep those ships and tankers going through, and potentially even considering offering insurance of up to $20 billion if they do so.
Okay, let's turn to Tawhid Asadi, who is live in Tehran. Tawhid, how has Iran reacted to the attack on what is a key part of its oil network? And of course, the news that U.S. amphibious teams and Marines are now heading to the region.
A very strong message of warning. That was something that we heard from the Iranian side as the actually airstrikes and by the Americans and Israelis continue. And that when it comes to that very specific place, we know that we're talking about one of the most geostrategically significant choke points for Iran when it comes to the oil exports of the country. And it goes without saying that a considerable amount of oil export of the country is going out through the trajectory of Kark, and that's why we hear this strong oil facilities, but the military and defensive infrastructures being targeted. 15 sounds of explosion were heard in the island, but they are saying that in case of any attack to the oil infrastructures, Iran is going to respond with attacking any oil structure which is in a sense affiliated with or has any collaboration with the Americans. And that sounds like a very strong message. A local official recently came out to say that the trajectory of export goes on as usual, as normal. And of course, this is not the entire picture. You know that we know that there are also other strong messages coming from the Iranian side. The IRGC very recently came out about the 49th wave of their retaliatory strikes targeting U.S. military bases across the region. Also, we've got another report again from the military side of the country saying that 3 military bases of the United States across the region were targeted. Meanwhile, we have other strong messages. IRGC Navy commander came out today to say that they have conducted attacks on U.S. bases. First vice president of the country said retaliatory strikes are going to be kept as long as the security of the country is maintained. Defense Ministry's spokesperson came out with a similar statement to say that Iran is going to use missiles with greater destructive power and greater precision in next round of retaliations. So we're dealing with a quite escalated situation as the Strait of Hormuz by the Iranian side is said to be closed, and Iran in that sense is trying to use its geostrategic leverage in the water to deal with this escalated situation.
Let me go back to you, Kimberly. We know the U.S. administration is under pressure because we're seeing prices soar in the U.S., particularly at the gas stations. What has the reaction been to the cost of this war?
Well, the reaction has been alarm, given the fact that in the last week we have seen gas prices or petrol prices at the consumer level increase by 50 cents a gallon. So that is an enormous amount for just 7 days in terms of a price increase. And so that has not only the ordinary Americans anxious, but also members of the president's own Republican Party. But what is alarming Americans even more is the fact that there is no definitive timeline for when this unpopular war, according to polling data, will end. In fact, the U.S. president in the last 24 hours has given an interview, again asked when this would end and saying when he feels that it is done. And that has concerned a large portion of Americans, who not only were not in favor of this war, but have war fatigue from a generation of conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And Kimberly, it's not just the timeline the US has been criticized for, it's also what seems to be a lack of strategy. Is there any sign from the White House that there is more of an agreement now on what the plan is and what victory would look like when it comes to this war?
The consistent response from the Trump administration is that our plan will not be publicized, given the fact that this is a conflict. And the idea is that you don't give your plan of how you intend to conduct a war to your opponent. And so that is the official defense. And so we're left reading the signals coming from the Trump administration in terms of what happens next, where things could go. What this really looks like from the standpoint of those watching the administration's signals very carefully is that the U.S. president has said this will end when there's, in his words, practically nothing left to target in Iran.
Okay, many thanks for that. Kimberly Hawker there at the White House. The Iranian military says it considers shipping ports in the UAE to be legitimate military targets.
Due to the destruction of its military bases in the region, the aggressive U.S. military has taken refuge near ports and docks and in hideouts within cities of the United Arab Emirates, and has launched its missiles towards the Iranian island of Abu Musa and parts of Karg Island. We hereby inform the leaders of the UAE that the Islamic Republic of Iran considers it its legitimate right, in defense of its national sovereignty and territory, to strike and target origins of the enemy's missile launches, including shipping ports, docks, and U.S. military hideouts sheltered within some cities of the UAE. We call on the Muslim people of the United Arab Emirates and population centers to evacuate ports, docks, and locations used by American forces in UAE cities so that they are not harmed.
Well, shortly after that message from the Iranian military, smoke was seen rising from Fujairah port in the United Arab Emirates. UAE officials say that a fire started after debris fell from an intercepted drone. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps says UAE ports, docks, and military sites are all legitimate targets due to that attack on Karg Island. Insa bin Rashid is in the UAE near the port of Fujairah. He explains why it's so strategically important, especially now that the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed.
At around 7:30, 7:45 this morning, there was yet another attack. It's believed that there were two Iranian drones that targeted that site. And as a result, we're seeing two large columns of smoke billowing out of that oil facility down there. There were huge blazes as well that emergency services are still tackling this afternoon. This is now the second time that Iran has targeted this facility, which is incredibly important and incredibly strategic as well. Oil operations from there have been suspended as a result. And it's also very much near to the entrance of the Strait of Hormuz where I am. So not now are we seeing only that the passageway here at the Strait of Hormuz is blocked and isn't allowing oil through. We're also seeing oil being suspended from that Fujairah facility. It is important because it allows oil exports essentially to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. So it's been heavily reliant over the last couple of weeks, whilst oil hasn't been passing through these waterways behind me, which are now, of course, incredibly dangerous, very perilous waterways as Iran continues to attack some vessels in the vicinity. I just want to mention a bit about what the IRGC have specifically said, because it seems like this is a retaliation attack to what happened overnight at Karg Islands. This is just one of those retaliations, and they've said that they will continue to target other oil facilities in the Gulf. They also said today that US interests in the United Arab Emirates, including ports, docks, and military locations, they believe are legitimate targets after the US forces attacked the Iranian islands. They've also said and advised residents of the UAE to evacuate ports, docks, and US military shelters and to avoid civilian casualties by going into shelters.
Okay, aside from those attacks in the UAE, there have been other attacks across the Gulf this Saturday morning, including here in Doha. Let's go to our correspondent, Dmitry Medvedenko, who is live for us. So in Doha, the Ministry of Defense has confirmed there were interceptions over Doha overnight. We had residents in downtown areas who rushed to shelters. This feels like the stakes have been rising just a little bit higher. It's different from what people have experienced here before. What's being made of this?
Well, last night's events did indeed shake things up here in Doha. Literally first, because around 1:30 a.m. there was a massive blast that could be felt pretty much everywhere around the city, but as well figuratively because an hour before this blast happened, residents of two districts here in Doha, that is Sherab and Education City,